I want to start off. So this is a bit of a thought piece discussion that I hope to talk about more in the breakout session. I'm going to start with our key principles at Creative Commons for all of the open knowledge work that we do. So first, fundamentally, we believe that publicly funded knowledge, knowledge that's funded with taxpayer money mainly, should be openly licensed by default. The data should be in the worldwide public domain using CC0. And there should be no embargo period, meaning at the point of publication, public has access. Second, that public funds allocated to produce knowledge should be spent as effectively and efficiently as possible to maximize the public good. That is, if you are a worker for a government, you have a fiscal duty to use all of the tools at your disposal, including open, to spend the money as effectively as possible. Third, that publicly funded knowledge, once created, should be stewarded by public institutions, the academy, and/or trusted nonprofits. And sort of by extension, we shouldn't be giving it over to commercial entities. Next, equity should be at the core. I would expand this: equity, social justice, inclusiveness, all of these absolutely critical design concepts and efforts and philosophies and ethics need to be baked in at the very beginning of any of these models that we're building. If we do work with commercial organizations, we all do, but our argument is that they should be treated by public institutions and the academy as work for hire. So yes, we should use them when we need them, but when we give them money, whatever it is that they produce through our procurement process or grant process, we should own what they build. So we should hold copyright to it. Which goes to the last one: the copyright to publicly funded works or knowledge should be held by the authors and/or the public institution that funded that knowledge. It should not be transferred back to commercial publishers. So that's the kind of overall groundwork for this discussion. I'm going to break this up into 4 different sections. I'm going to talk about the opportunity that we've had really for the last 20 plus years, but we're still underusing it. Talk about some challenges, how the landscape's changing a bit, and what power do we have that we can take action now. So first, opportunity. You all probably know this, roughly late 1990s, early 2000s, we got this trifecta of tools that humanity didn't have before. First, we were producing kind of everything in education digitally. We moved to digital video, digital audio capture. We had computers. We were building digital text. So we went digital. Second, we got the internet and the web in its functional form, where we could move these digital things at high speeds all over the world. And third, we got open licensing. Creative Commons started right about that time. And so you put these tools together, and what we got was this ability to legally share with everybody on the planet at the marginal cost of 0. We could share education, research, data, other science, software, hardware, specs. And this was a radical change from before. The cost efficiencies, the higher return on investment, the reduced friction for entering into contracts with people was radically changed when we had these 3 tools in our back pocket. And just to talk, I'm from Creative Commons, so of course I'll talk just a minute about CC and our tools. We realized when we started that free is not good enough, that we needed open. And open's different than free. Open is free access or plus legal permission. So you have to have the legal permissions to do things with the works. In education, oftentimes we talk about David Wiley's 5 R's, the right to reuse, revise, remix, redistribute, and retain a copy of the work. And those rights are not given when we're dealing with a lot of commercial entities. Oftentimes we have the right to reuse only up until the point that we stop paying the lease fee to those materials. So I'm at Creative Commons. Just a bit about us. We're a nonprofit. We are the open licenses steward for the CC licenses that you've probably used. We've been around a long time. We operate all over the world. The licenses work all over the world. We've got a global network of experts in countries around the world. Our licenses are translated into, I think, 43 languages. I'd have to check on that. The licenses are perpetual. We've dedicated them to the public domain, so they're free to use forever. They've become, over the last 20 years, kind of the international standard for open copyright licensing, meaning there isn't really an alternative out there for open copyright licenses that people actually use, which works fine because our licenses are free and we provide training around them, and they just kind of work for everybody. We have obviously versioned those licenses over time, and we'll continue to do so as the world changes and the legal tools need to change with them. The tools are robust. They've never once lost in a court of law in 20 years. If you want to go to type in CC case law, and you can go see our database on that. And we don't work alone. We work with open communities and other open organizations around the world. Our vision is a world where knowledge and culture are equitably shared in ways that serve the public interest. So you can see the link back to my first two slides. We're interested in the public interest. What can we do for humans with the commons that's better than what we have today? And which levers do we need to pull to get there? These are our licenses and our public domain tools. You've probably seen them. We have 6 open copyright licenses, or 6 CC licenses. And then the one that a lot of people use, especially in open data, is our CC0 public domain dedication, where you're actually giving up the copyright of your work and dedicating it to the public domain. Whereas with the licenses, you keep your copyright and you're giving the public a license to do certain things under certain conditions. The licenses are perpetual and they're irrevocable. So perpetual, they last forever until the work goes into the public domain, the copyright expires, and irrevocable, once there's a CC license on a work, that license cannot be pulled back. For education, this is critical for us because we build our courses, our degree programs, our training programs, our certificates. And if somebody was able to reach in and say, no, you can't use that anymore, that would be a big problem for us as educators. By the way, I should have said my past is I'm an educator. So we proudly put the open in open access research, and OER, and open data, in all of these various sectors across open knowledge and in open culture as well. So these are the areas that we work in. And then at the bottom, and I'll talk more about this today, we also work with open policies to support all of those various open sectors. Open education, which is primarily what we're talking about today. To get specific, we're talking about no cost access for at least one version of the work. Usually that's the digital version, because we can make unlimited copies for near zero cost. No paywall. That they're openly licensed, and it has to be a license that allows adaptations. So, for example, our no derivatives licenses, we say that they're not OER compatible because they don't allow adaptations that can be shared with the public, or they can be in the public domain. They can be in any medium or format, preferably one that's editable, because we want people to be able to use the permissions in the license. And if we give people a lockdown PDF, that's nice for reuse, but it doesn't allow me to, say, translate it into a different language easily. And then no embargo period. So you'll see some of those same themes there. So as we think about systems of knowledge, where the power structures are, where the money is flowing, we have some very simple questions, like, why do we teach? Why do we do education? Why do we do science? Why do we publish research? Well, we do these things because they're in the public interest. Knowledge, we fundamentally believe, is a public good. And because it's a public good, it should be funded publicly. And that open sharing advances universal access to knowledge and culture and furtherance of fundamental human rights. Again, we're talking about education. So let's go to Article 26 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. And Article 26 says everybody has the right to an education. So again, back to the 3 tools, if this is a goal that we collectively have, we ought to be using digital, internet, and open licensing to the hilt, so that we are maximizing our ability to reach this goal. So as we mull all this, CC's just had our 20th birthday. We're thinking about, okay, what do we do in the next 20 years? This is the question we're asking. What are the world's greatest challenges? And we look to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These are universally agreed upon goals, challenges, problems that the world faces. I'll point out that these are all human-caused problems and are going to require human solutions. And so our premise is very simple. If you want to solve any of these SDGs, the knowledge about them and the culture about them must be open. The knowledge about them, the science, the data, the educational resources, the academic research has to be open. Think about when COVID came out and the science advisors of the world, of the national governments, leaned on the big commercial academic journal publishers and said, you must open up all of the COVID research right now. We have a global problem. We can't deal with your paywalls. This can't be something that only the rich get access to. You've got to give everybody access to it. And they did. And it was because it was a crisis. Well, we argue that these are all crises. Like, we have to deal with this. And number 13 is probably the first thing that we have to deal with, but it's related to everything else. You can't do climate action unless you're working on affordable and clean energy, or life on land, or life below water, or gender equality, or poverty. All these things are interrelated. And so we've got to open up the knowledge about them. Why culture? Well, as I said, these are all human created problems. We'd better understand the culture of the people that are causing these problems and the culture of all of us to think about how we're going to solve those problems. So more about that later. What about OER? What role does OER have to play in working on the SDGs? Well, it can be the educational resources to teach about the SDGs. SDGs, of course, are constantly changing and morphing, and progress is being made. And OER, because it's openly licensed, can be updated in real time. So my doctorate's in education psychology. I'm interested in how learners learn deeply. And one of the premises of our field is that if learners can work on complex, authentic problems that are meaningful to them, where they actually see a connection to their life, something that they want to do good in the world, they learn more deeply. And so learning about biology in the context of SDGs is a really good idea in terms of learning design. And learners want to make a difference in the world. They want to work on things that matter. They don't want to sit in rows and spit back facts on a test. UNESCO just put out a report recently that said, it was called Youth Demands for Quality Climate Change Education. And 70% of the students they surveyed around the world said they can't adequately explain climate change because they don't know anything about it. There's no climate change education in over half of the K-12 schools on the planet. And that's just insane, right? Here we have OER, and we can openly license, share what we've got, and we're not in an effective way. So this is, all kind of boils down to this. Sharing knowledge is a social justice issue. Challenges. So we think we're on the right side of history on this one, collectively with the overall commons movement. But what do the commercial entities have to say about this? Well, they don't like this, right? So in education, they're introducing what's often called inclusive access or equitable access into universities and colleges around the world, where the cost of digital course content or the cost of textbooks and other materials is actually baked into, hidden in, we would say, students' tuition and fees. And so now they might say, oh, my textbooks are free. Well, they're not free. It just got jammed into your tuition, and now it's hidden, and it's very difficult to get it out. And so what are the incentives now to use OER at that university? They obviously drop because the students have already paid for all of their materials, and so the professors just choose from the big catalog. In the academic journal side, we've shifted, unfortunately, into article processing charges as one of the dominant models, or commonly called gold open access, where it used to be you had to be rich to read, and now you have to be rich to write. You have to be rich to be published. And some of these article processing charges, they can range anywhere from, say, $200 on the low end, which isn't bad, but all the way up to $9,000, $10,000 on the high end, which oftentimes is not in people's budgets. In the United States, since most of our audience is from the US here, we had a huge win where the Office of Science, Technology, and Policy in the White House said, hey, all publicly funded research needs to be freely available with no embargo. Commercial publishers came back and they said, they put appropriations language in the appropriations bill that said you can't spend, no US department can spend any money implementing that new policy. And so you can look at the second bullet here. None of the funds made available by this act may be used to administer the OST's policy that says we should publicly share the publicly funded research. Like, think about that. We all paid as taxpayers for research to be done, and we don't get access to the research that we paid for. It's insane. So, like, why do we allow this to happen? So good news, landscape is changing. UNESCO, one of the big players in kind of the knowledge space. UNESCO, of course, has education, science, and culture baked into it. That's the ESC. They, in 2019, adopted a recommendation on open educational resources. If you haven't read it, you should go read it. It's quite good. And it says, hey, national governments, here's all the things you should do around OER. In 2021, they also adopted a recommendation on open science. This is also an excellent document. You should go read this. And it says, hey, national governments of the world, here's what you should do for open science. So these international frameworks are a huge opportunity to advance both open education, open science, open access research around the world, because when we're working with national governments, we have the opportunity to have significant scaled impact. Why? Because that's where the money is, to be totally blunt. We change the rules on the money, we change the rules on the ecosystem and people's behavior. Meaning, if a government says, if you take this grant, and then you have to publish whatever you build under a CC BY license, then people will do it because they want the grant money to go figure out better batteries for EVs, for example. So how do we do this in the most effective, efficient, equitably, and socially just way? Well, there's a fascinating discussion happening in the open access research space, and they're calling it Diamond Open Access. What it boils down to is that rather than let commercial publishers run the show and have us turn our copyright over to them and let them charge us either high subscription fees or article processing charges, why don't we just take all that back? Why don't we take back the means of production and distribution into the academy so that all of a sudden open access research is community driven, it's academically led and academically owned, meaning universities own the journals, or nonprofit organizations that work in the open access space own the journals. And so this idea is very much in line with the principles that I started with. I'm not going to go through all the details of Diamond OA, but if you're interested in it, there's a lot written about it. There's a new conference coming up in Cape Town in December. If you really want to dive into it, you can go to that conference. But here's the point. People say, oh, well, that's going to be impossible. How are you going to fund this new thing? Because all of our money is already tied up over here with expensive journals. And the answer is the sustainable model for Diamond Open Access is simple. It's to fund research as a public good. And to the extent that our libraries are spending huge amounts of their budget with big universities, we're talking about millions and tens of millions of dollars in some cases on journal subscriptions or on article processing charges. The answer is stop spending our money that way and instead invest in open models. And so this is hard, right? It's hard to think about how we're going to solve the world's most pressing challenges. It's hard to think about designing new models that don't exist, and thinking about and being honest about how the current models are not equitable, and bringing in people that maybe we don't usually work with or don't usually talk to into conversations, including students, so that we can get to a point where we're ensuring that publicly funded knowledge actually is a public good. So, here we are, educators, so they're working on Diamond Open Access. What does Diamond Open Education look like? Is that something we should do? I think it is. Could we have a conversation with national governments and say, and in fact, the UNESCO recommendation on OER calls for this. Hey, governments, when you spend money on educational resources, they should be open by default. And then there should be a sustained, publicly funded, open education infrastructure and support services for educators. So educators and librarians and instructional designers should not be doing this off the side of their desk. It shouldn't be an additional burden. There should be significant resources to support this activity and hopefully switch the model so this becomes the dominant activity. Same thing as in terms of sustainability, right? You want to have open education that is the norm. You need to fund education as a public good. So what should we do now? A lot of times people say, well, it's too hard. I'm up against Elsevier. They're too big. I can't make change. I'm up against Pearson Publishing or McGraw-Hill. They're too big. They've got sales team. I'm just one person at my school or one person at my university. So what can we do? Well, we can fight back. We actually have a ton of power. We just have to think about it. So one of the things that's happening is at these big journals, the editorial boards, which are professors, are quitting, and they're taking their expertise and their reputations and they're moving over and setting up new open access journals. So this example was when the journal Neuroimage, which was kind of the top journal for neuroscience, and they had professors from all over, they said to Elsevier, we're done, and we're going to go set up our own journal. So what this boils down to is we need to shift the money to open. So we need national governments, state governments, provincial governments, foundations to adopt open license requirements on grants and contracts. We need them to say, if you take our money and build stuff, what you build has to be open. If you won't open your works that you build with our money, you can't have our money. And we've been very successful over the past roughly 15 years in getting a lot of those policies in place. Second thing we can do is at a local level, we can have what I call open procurement. So open policies are more top down. Open procurement's more bottom up. So open procurement is my K-12 school has maybe $500,000 a year to buy curriculum every year. And so, what can we build or buy or commission what we need? But when we buy it or we commission it to be built, let's make sure we own the copyright on what we buy. And then we have an internal policy that says we're going to openly license what we own. So Utah, for example, does this with their math materials. My kids here in Washington State use Utah paid for, Utah copyrighted, Utah openly licensed math materials. And they're amazing. And our Washington State didn't have to pay anything for it. It cost Utah nothing to share those math materials with the world. They did it for their own students, but they're actually excellent math materials. And so you want to shorten that up. It's buy what you need, own what you buy, share what you own. And so let me close by just saying, we've got these tools. We have the power to make change. We all need to step forward and become advocates for solutions that are actually just and ethically right and are focused on solving the big problems of the day.